Oklahoma's favorite son is Will Rogers. And I just recently spoke at the 75th anniversary of the dedication of his memorial in Oklahoma. And one of the lines that I quoted, if we have time later, I'll tell you a couple of other things that Will said about religion, including the piece that he wrote attacking his old friend William Jennings Bryan for criticizing the teacher for teaching evolution in Tennessee. The piece was entitled, "We Might As Well Be Monkeys If We Act Like Them." But Will said something that I quoted last week that may be relevant. He said, "Once ignorance gets started, it knows no bounds." About a year ago, I was invited to speak to a group of retired Oklahomans who live at a place called Epworth Villa. And Epworth Villa is a Methodist retirement home. Oklahoma City University is loosely affiliated with the Methodist Church. And a number of these folks at this home are donors of ours and wonderful people. And I like elderly people. And I agreed to speak to them. They had a huge crowd. They had to bring chairs in. And I think it might have been because I told them what I was going to talk about was political wit and humor of Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is a place, a lot of southern places are like that, like this. It has an amusing political culture. We say there's always an aroma in Oklahoma around election time. And, one of the leading racists of the modern South, a guy named Alfalfa Bill Murray, was the architect of our Constitution, and it was the longest Constitution written by the pen of man at the time it was passed. Later, Oklahoma, by the way, you proud New Yorkers, we had more socialists by number than you did in Oklahoma. And the leading socialist, Oscar Emringer, said that politics was the art of taking money from the rich and votes from the poor on the pretext of protecting each from the other. But he also pointed out that socialism grows where every other crop fails. And that's why we had a lot of socialism in southeastern Oklahoma. Nothing else worked, and so people were for just about anything. The socialist roots were very shallow, and they vanished. But anyway, I had this large crowd, and as I came in, they were still bringing chairs in, and this sweet elderly woman handed me a folded piece of paper, and she said, "Please, Judge Henry, if you get time at the end of your speech, would you answer this question?" Well, I couldn't wait to see what the question was. And the question was, what do we have to fear from Sharia law? And I thought, how sad is this? These sweet people here in this retirement village, and someone has somehow convinced them that there is something to fear from this. What was it Stephen Colbert said the other day? Well, anyway. So I did finish my speech, and then I answered it. What I could have said is what you really have to fear is some things from this misguided response to Sharia law. Some problems with Establishment Clause, free exercise, and equal protection violations of our Constitution, some violations of freedom to contract, some disrupting of international law and international business and collection of judgments, some messing up of our choice of law doctrines that have grown for hundreds of years in America, some messing up of international marriage and family law conventions, who's married and who's not, and violation of the separation of powers. There are lots of things that come from the proposed solution to this non-existent problem. But instead, I just said that you really don't have anything to fear. And I tried to explain it. Because, as Noah Feldman has said repeatedly, Sharia law needs a press agent. It has received the worst press of any doctrine imaginable. People think it does all sorts of horrible things, when really it is a way. That's what it means, a way, or the way to water. I find it interesting, Wallace Stegner some years ago gave a lecture at the University of Michigan on the West, and he said the defining characteristic of the West, the defining character of the West, is aridity. Lack of water defines everything in the West. Well, lack of water is important in the Arab world too. And when water is found, that water is better if it's not stationary, if it's moving, if it's evolving, if it responds to needs and interpretation and so forth. And so Sharia law as it exists today, and one of my colleagues reminds me that this is a modern creation of the nation state, but Sharia law is like canon law. It's different in every country that has it. Sharia law in Morocco, where I've been many times, is hardly recognizable. In Afghan Taliban, it was as harsh as it could possibly be, perhaps. And in other countries, it's a mix. So there is no universal pandemic of some Sharia law that's going to come and engulf. It's a different sort of thing. And then it's perhaps its purest use. It's not, in one sense, legal at all. It's at least in terms of the secular laws that we use. But where Sharia law has had the worst of its press, the worst need of the press agent, is in that area of law known as criminal law. Sort of a lex talionis idea. And remember, lex talionis was invented in the Torah, in the Jewish scriptures. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Although the rabbis made it clear that they never interpreted that literally. In their commentaries, they point out, what if a person had only one eye and he blinded someone else? How would that be just to blind him? Rather, the lex talionis was a call for money damages. And it was, I think, the greatest step forward the law has ever taken. I can't think of a step greater than that, because it used to be, you steal my cow, I burn your village, kill your daughter, and sow salt in the ground. And the Lord says in these commandments, no, wait a minute, the punishment has to fit the crime. And that's a very, very important thing. So, as I pointed out to these wonderful elderly people in Oklahoma, when you commit a crime, you don't get to choose the criminal law that you're prosecuted under. If you did, you wouldn't choose Oklahoma's criminal law. We incarcerate more people longer than anybody else. So if you had a choice and could choose criminal law, Sharia law would help you. Even in Saudi Arabia, it would help you. As one of my Egyptian friends once told me, he said, I can conceive of a possible way where I might get 39 lashes if everything came out right. He said, I can steal 3 DVDs in California and get life without parole. He said, which one would you take, Judge Henry? Well, I'd get my doctor there and take the 39 lashes. I know what life without parole in Oklahoma means. So you don't get to pick the criminal law. The criminal law is there, and it will be applied. So you don't have to worry about hand chopping and even the 39 lashes. All you have to worry about is if your grandkid steals 3 DVDs. So you also, similarly, don't get to choose tort law as a rule. There are choice of law clauses and provisions that allow us to determine what tort law should apply. And so there's not a great chance of Sharia law that, and of course if the law is contrary to public policy, it's not going to be applied. In terms of contracts, that's the whole point. You get to choose the law when you have a contract. We have freedom of contract. And as my very conservative friend Eugene Volokh says, American law really doesn't look to why people do things. They don't look to the why behind prenuptials or wills, or they look to the formality. Was it done properly? And so in contract law, it's part of American law that you have freedom of contract. Thus in Oklahoma, I happen to serve on the board of Oklahoma's largest corporation, Devon Energy. Devon Energy is about 40% Canadian. A lot of contracts that Devon uses have Canadian choice of law clauses. Now, I have to tell you, I think Canada is our greatest friend, our best friend. 6,000 miles of undefended border. But they are foreign, and their law is foreign. They had their chance to join us in the revolution, and they didn't. I think they probably made the right decision. But anyway, so it's a part of American law that you get to have freedom of contract. So this, it was discouraging to me. And I explained, you know, this is the first time I've ever really been able to answer this question because I stepped down from the federal bench. I was unindicted. I stepped down from the federal bench. And one of the last cases I wrote was a case where I extended the same protection to Muslim inmates with respect to their diet in the prisons that we did to Jewish inmates that, to my astonishment, the state of Oklahoma contested. Anyway, this has been kind of a long battle. Well, now it's been mixed, as our introducer told us, with the foreign and international law. Now there is an argument, and Justice Scalia is one of the leading advocates that foreign law shouldn't be utilized in various cases. And incidentally, Scalia rhymes with Sharia, and it reminds me that the title of this talk of mine is "How Do You Solve a Problem Like Sharia?" Because I actually am going to tell you how I think we can solve this. But it's astonishing to me that we can quote Plato. It was Greek to me. We can quote Plato. We can quote Aristotle. We can quote John Lennon. We can probably quote Vladimir Lenin. And we certainly can quote the Venerable Montesquieu. That was Hamilton's phrase, the Venerable Montesquieu. Need I remind you, he was French. This stuff is foreign. I don't understand why we can argue by analogy from Plato or by analogy from Montesquieu, but we can't say, you know, we've got a bunch of terrorism stuff. Let's look at some things Israel's done. Maybe they might help us. A couple of years ago, I gave the Brennan lecture here, and I picked, because I once heard Norman Dorson give one of the most fabulous speeches I've ever heard about the judge he clerked for, Justice Harlan II. And my middle name is Harlan. My family liked Harlan, the first one, and that's where that got started in the Henry family. So I loved one of Justice Harlan's dissents, a dissent in a case called Poe versus Ullman. And this was a case where Connecticut had passed a law that you could not give even contraceptive advice to women. You couldn't even give, and contraceptives, of course, but I mean, this was a pure law. You couldn't even give contraceptive advice. And Justice Harlan, one of the paradigmatic conservatives with Felix Frankfurter of the Warren era, was totally offended by this. Here's this blue blood Rhodes Scholar guy who's probably not going to have a lot of trouble with this law. And he is just so offended, he talks for almost 60 minutes in the conference on it. And he writes this stinging dissent saying that we have traditions in this country, and those traditions are living, and that part of substantive due process protects this right. And the case was really about living traditions and substantive due process. That's what I wrote about. It was a constitutional interpretation thing, suggesting that the due process clause is flexible and has some room for evolution in it, which Justice Harlan believed. This was the case that Judge Bork, in his hearing, took Harlan to task for and attacked Harlan and said he's wrong. He needs to be a constitutional inerrantist, a textualist, and so forth. And I'm just reading this, writing my talk, and then I get to the last of the case, which I haven't read in a long time, and finally I see where Justice Harlan says, furthermore, the utter novelty of this enactment is informative. And he says, I've looked at all these jurisdictions and not a single jurisdiction in the world prohibits this. And I'm writing my law review article and I say, yep. That's a good Oklahoma word. Why you be, yep. There it is, foreign law. We had foreign law then. He looked at it to help us try to figure out the contours of substantive due process. So Oklahoma got this started, I'm sorry to say. And they passed this law. The people passed it, but the legislature started it. And it says the courts the courts, when exercising their judicial authority, I'm going to skip the stuff you don't need here, shall uphold and adhere to the law as provided in the United States Constitution, the Oklahoma Constitution, that's the hard part, the United States Code, federal regulations, established common law, the Oklahoma statutes promulgated pursuant thereto, and if necessary, the law of another state. The states are a little suspect too. Provided the law of the other state does not include Sharia law in making judicial decisions. The courts, now, then they even go further into what we call meddling. Specifically, the courts shall not consider international law or Sharia law. The provisions of this subsection shall apply to all cases before the respective courts, including but not limited to cases of first impression. So I guess that means they're going to be retroactively applied, which is kind of interesting. Well, the old Constitution here, Article 1, Section 8, Subsection 10, talks about that Congress shall have the power to, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. So our Constitution admits explicitly that the law of nations exists. Justinian was right. There are the Declaration of Independence was a legal brief written to the law of nations. We're independent. Here's why. We want the world community to acknowledge our independence. So Oklahoma passed this, and fortunately, the 10th Circuit, both Judge Miles LaGrange, who's the chief district judge in the Western District in Oklahoma City where I live, tossed the case out under the Lemon test, and and then the Court of Appeals, interesting panel, 2 Mormon judges and a very conservative Republican judge, unanimously tossed out the Save Our State initiative, referendum that was passed, based upon, it's kind of a technical opinion because this was a preliminary injunction, and so you have to go through all the folly-roll of did the plaintiff show likelihood of success, real and concrete injury that's likely to be redressed, and so forth. It can't just be a constitutional right, but there has to be a real concrete injury. And the court didn't seem to have any particular problem holding that. Well, Oklahoma has come back with another effort that's, I'm going to quit because there are other people who know more about this, but it's pretty discouraging and pretty confusing. And it seeks to say the same thing by just simply taking Sharia law out and applying this to foreign law. And interestingly, it excludes corporations. It applies this to individuals, but excludes corporations, which probably is a great relief to the corporations who would like to have their judgments collected and their contracts followed. So, well, what really can be done about this? Well, first of all, people need to speak out. And Abrahamic groups could start with the great law chapter of the Torah, Leviticus 19, Robert Alter's translation of 33 and 34. And should a sojourner sojourn with you, you shall not wrong him. Like the native among you shall be the sojourner who sojourns with you. And you shall love him like yourself, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So in the Torah, when you hear a commandment that ends with I am the Lord your God, that sort of means read it again. They don't all end that way. That means it's a big one. I really mean it. And that would be one thing we could do. Business groups have not adequately spoken out on this. I cannot understand it because its interference with foreign law would be so highly disruptive. Many, many years ago, well, it was actually 1987, which seems like many years ago, I made my first trip to the People's Republic of China, and all the American companies there were using Swedish choice of law clauses. That's because that's what the Chinese demanded. They didn't want American law. And the American companies were doing quite well with those Swedish choice of law clauses. I mean, we would totally wreck and mess up international commerce if we do that. Other religious groups should speak out. I was sharing with my colleague the Methodist Book of Discipline is just fantastic on this. It calls for dialogue with Muslims. It worries explicitly about prejudice against Muslims and Arabs in the United States. Listen to this passage. Even though Jews, Christians, and Muslims share the same covenant, in many of our cities, now that's pretty big stuff right there, share the same covenant. In many of our cities and towns, we continue to live as strangers apart. A positive foundation from which to connect with persons in other faith communities is recognition of some of the gifts they bring to a human community. For instance, through Judaism, Christians can connect to the covenantal faithfulness of God. Islam illustrates the joy of life lived in obedience to God's will. The spiritualities of indigenous peoples encourage a deep reverence for God's natural creation. Buddhism offers contemplative ways to connect to the divine. Hinduism, in its varieties, brings the gift of tolerance. Engaging in dialogue with positive expectation offers the possibility of sharing mutually beneficial spiritual gifts as well as overcoming past hostilities. It's pretty good stuff. Scholars and educators need to speak out. I was on a panel with Eugene Volokh, and at the end of the panel, where he and I disagreed about a few things, he came over and said, "Now, Judge Henry, you know that I'm very conservative." And I said, "Yes, I do. But I also know you're smart because our mutual friend Sandra Day O'Connor told me so, and you clerked for her." And he said, "Well, do these Oklahoma legislators, do they understand what they're doing?" And I said, "Well, no, except that they understand they're trying to poke Muslims in the eye. That's the whole point of this, is to do that. They don't really understand anything about the commerce and the settled expectations of law that they would mess." And Volokh said, "Well, I will come. I will talk in Oklahoma." And I said, "You're on. I have a lecture series at the University of Oklahoma." And he came and gave a brilliant talk. It will be published in the Law Review, and I'll make sure that you get it because it's very, very well done. And he begins by talking about an Oklahoman who is in the military. He goes to Germany. He lives there. He marries a German woman, has a child, and later they have a divorce. What are we going to do? We got to have some law to apply. And it's in all likelihood, given the fact scenario, which I'm not fully explaining, that he explained, it will be German law. And Merkel just won again. So we established a chair in Islamic studies at Oklahoma City University. And the Islamic community came out. I lost one trustee over this. I'm glad to see her go. The amicus briefs filed, there was a wonderful amicus brief filed by the American Jewish Committee, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the Anti-Defamation League, the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. That's not the Southern Baptists, that's another group. And the Union for Reform Judaism in support of the Muslim plaintiff here. And some years ago, so other religious groups need to be involved, and we need to litigate. We need to file amici briefs. And a few years ago, it was Oklahoma's Centennial, and the Muslim community was visiting the capital, and one of the women from Iran, Marjan Sarafipour, was talking to a Christian legislator and said, "What could we do to participate in this Centennial?" And the Christian legislator said, "Well, the Southern Baptists came and gave everybody a Bible. Why don't you come and give a Quran?" Which she did, and all hell broke loose. And people were calling press conferences, "I won't take this," blah, blah, blah. And at another press conference, the leader of the Jewish community in Oklahoma City asked for a copy of the Centennial Quran and asked to have some time on the dais. Nobody knew what he was going to say. He got up and he said, "Today, I am a Muslim." This is a gesture of kindness. This is a gesture, this is a good book. This is a book of wisdom. Today, I'm a Muslim. So people need to speak out. And the last thing, I was just thinking, isn't it interesting? We used to talk about the Supreme Court, and we used to say there's going to be a Catholic seat. and there's going to be a Jewish seat. And we went on and on about that. Well, now there's 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. So there are no Protestants there. I hope these guys don't figure that out. Because there will soon be a new constitutional amendment to require Protestants on the Supreme Court if they can find it. That will go along with it. So it is, you know, I've tried to inject a little humor because that's how you live in Oklahoma. But it's very serious. And I think I've read some of the things that the Brennan Center has put out, and I really think that it's what I've read from the Brennan Center is correct, that this really down deep is simply an attempt to hurt the Muslim community in this country. And we know too much about religious freedom to allow that. We all came, many of us came here, that Catholics came to Maryland. And in Oklahoma, you pretty much had to be kicked out of someplace else to come there. The Indians were forced there, and then the people that made the land run weren't the economic winners of society. They were people that were the down and out. And so we've really learned too much from our Enlightenment framers, and we need to stick with it.